Hi, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show, your one-stop shop for all things Commanders. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Like today's episode from Monumental Sports, Mitch Tischler joins the show. Mitch, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I've been told today is National Donut Day, so happy National Donut Day to all those that celebrate. Mitch, what is your go-to donut?
You know, for years it was a Boston cream or a chocolate glaze, but as of late, the straight glaze has started to hit, and it's sort of become my favorite. I feel like it's one of the old man things that's starting to enter my life as I'm advancing each year.
I am definitely was a Boston cream guy for sure. They have a little donut shop. I'm here at the beach, and right up the street, they've got one. It's kind of like a Krispy Kreme, and that's all they do, right? Is the straight glazed, like they have a line down the street every day, like
Yeah.
two blocks just for the straight donut, and I can appreciate it. All right, we're year 2 into Dan Quinn. What do you know now about Dan Quinn and company that you didn't last year?
I get at this time last year we were just getting to know DQ and the coaches and Adam Peters and the whole group, so everything was kind of brand new to us. We went through 4 years of Ron Rivera where he had a lot of sayings and comments and culture and all these different things that he talked about. And ultimately, a lot of it ended up being just talk and not a whole lot of execution. And so when Dan Quinn walked in and started talking about culture and wanting to build things the right way, and same with Adam Peters and company, you took it with a grain of salt. Obviously you want to give the guy, the benefit of the doubt because you haven't worked with him before. But now being a year in, you're seeing it through and through. And one of the places that I love to see it most is that he doesn't anoint the rookies. He makes them come into mini camps in this off-season time, and I imagine we get to training camp, it'll be similar. He makes those guys work for it, and you see not just the first rounders or second rounders, but all the way down the roster. No one's thrown in and they're an automatic starter. And I like that they've now kind of expanded that beyond just the draft picks. Along the offensive line, they talk about Laramie Tunsil's the only one with a guaranteed position. I mean, I think you and I know that other guys are guaranteed to start where they are, but they're not outwardly anointing anyone, and it creates, a good aura of competition and a good locker room vibe where guys are fighting with each other, trying to prove they belong where they are.
I thought this was interesting. Maybe they do this every year, and I just didn't realize it. But it was apparently like assistant coach day the other day. Maybe that was just for the media. I think it can't be talked about enough how important and maybe more so impressive that they brought the whole staff back, Mitch. I mean, when does that happen? I understand that the team was humming last year. A lot of time that means people are leaving. Is that more, you think it's more about the excitement that they're building with the players and what they're achieving, or is this a like to be around Dan type situation?
I think it's a little of each. I mean, rising tide lifts all ships, and you look at a team that overachieved a little last year, at least with relation to what folks thought they were going to be. And honestly, when you have a great quarterback in the NFL, you have an opportunity to do a lot of good things. And for all these coaches, the better this team plays, the better they perform, the better that they look in the eyes of the rest of the NFL. And 1 year can be a fluke, 2 years is a trend. And so I think if they have the same sort of success, I don't think we can necessarily, expect the same thing next year. But, for Commanders fans, for Burgundy and Gold fans, you think back, many, many years to the churn every year. There were new coaches. I mean, I always go back to, the Jason Campbell days when he had 4 OCs in 4 years to start his career. And that's just super tough to deal with. And even when you got to, as things started to progress, you just saw not necessarily the OC and head coach change year to year, but all the position coaches would change. The assistant position coaches would change left and right. And whenever anyone comes in, they're a little bit different in technique. They're a little different in the way they like to go about things. And so there's always an adjustment period. And I think it speaks a lot to Dan Quinn and Adam Peters. And, that big C word culture is there's a lot of fatigue around that word. But we're now seeing, all the things that Ron Rivera and company talked about, happen here. And I think you can look at the coaches coming back. I think you look at some of the free agents coming in, regardless of whether they were big name guys or not. I think about Will Harris. I think about Dietrich Wise, that group. One of the first things they talked about, why Washington wasn't, hey, they were really good last year, we want to be on a winning team. I'm sure that plays a big part of it. But it was, we heard around the league from guys that this was a great place to play, and it was fun to play at. And, I think that they balanced that competition and that fun, in a really good way. We saw it last year with the, cornhole and stuff like that. And this year they have the basketball hoop over in the bubble that the guys are shooting at. And, they find a way to create a situation where guys don't want to check in at 9:00 and check out at 5. They come in a little bit early, they hang out, they, play cards in the room. They stay through meetings and practices and meetings. And even afterwards, you see on the field after training camp or after OTA on Wednesday, guys like Deebo Samuel and Mikey Sainer still working. Josh Connerly was out there working extra. Will Harris. I mean, these are days that are voluntary, and I'm sure we'll get to guys that are here, not there, whatever. But the guys that are there are bought in, and not just bought in being there. They're bought in to get better in this time. And I think that's an important difference that we've seen with this organization between, this Dan Quinn era and previous ones.
How important was it for the young quarterback, one, that Mariota came back, and two, that Tavita Pritchard came back? I think a lot of people don't realize how important that quarterback coach position is. A lot of people assume it's all Cliff Kingsbury. I'm sure he has a lot to do with a lot of things, but they're going to spend more of their time with the quarterback coach. It feels like that was 2 big wins.
Yeah, I mean, getting Tavita Pritchard back, I thought was huge. He's a guy that I expect to have a pretty steep rise in the NFL in the years to come. But to have that consistency year 1 to year 2, like we talked about, I think is important because, the things that Jaden was improving last year from his time at LSU, he now can take and build on a second time. And you're not really in the situation where you're trying to, relearn small tactics that might be different between one coach to the other. And Mariota coming back is great. I think having him in year 1 was the bigger deal. But Mariota also went out and played well. I mean, what we saw last year in training camp, I was legit talking about, like, does this guy even have a roster spot necessarily? And, he's a veteran and he's, a former number 2 overall pick, all those different things. But, the backbone that he built in that quarterback room with Jaden, and in terms of creating that same feeling around the room is important. And on top of it, he's not just a placeholder. He's not just a guy that's, hey, we need a veteran to help out Jaden. He's a guy that went out on the field and was able to do it when he needed to. And that's an important thing, obviously, for a backup quarterback when your starting quarterback is a mobile guy the way Jaden is.
I'm curious your thoughts on the Connerly pick. I haven't talked to you since the draft. They obviously were very excited about it. Simmons, the kid from Ohio State, goes a couple picks later, so it's obvious they preferred Connerly. I've talked to a bunch of people who said if Connerly went back to school for another year and played the same way, he's probably a top 10 pick. He came out a little early, which is why some of that strength isn't there. I think he's only 21 years old still. So I'm curious about that pick and how much that pick also gets Coleman over to where he probably belongs. It feels like it's a double improve for the line.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that was a really good pick, but I think the biggest, most important thing about that pick was it shows a front office that's looking to build long term.
Right.
Because there were guys that they could have taken there who may have had a bigger impact this season or right away at positions of need, but more so they're looking big picture. And quite frankly, whether the team had a GM or not, in the 15, 16, 17 years, however many it's been covering this team, I haven't seen a front office take that perspective at the draft. It was always about, hey, what can we get now? And to get a guy who probably grades out better long-term, but is also able to help you this year, means a lot. And you saw Adam Peters and Dan Quinn and, this front office really send a message that, hey, we see what's happening around the NFL. More so, we see what's happening in this division, and we know what we have to do to get better, to compete more with those teams. And so it's not just the Laramie Tunsil signing. It's not just bringing in Connerly. I mean, I think that you're looking at a group that recognizes the need to get better on both sides up front at the line, because you also look at what they did on the defensive line with the Dietrich Wise, Javon Kinlaw signings. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of players on an NFL field that stand out as bigger and taller than other NFL players.
Yes.
And Javon Kinlaw is one of them. And quite frankly, if Javon wasn't there, we'd probably be saying that about Dietrich Wise. And, for Wise to come in with the experience that he has, Kinlaw with that experience, it's only going to help out the rest of this group. Johnny Newton is, I think, going to benefit greatly from that. And so I love that we're seeing a team that's building, and they talked about it. Again, it's another topic that they talked about and now they're executing on. They talked about wanting to get better long term, not just build a winner for this year, next year, maybe 2 years from now. They want to be one of these model franchises. They want to be, a Kansas City Chiefs, a Philadelphia Eagles, as much as that stings my tongue to say that, who's competitive every single year.
Yeah.
And the way you do that is building the lines, and they're doing it.
It's interesting how they've done it, Mitch. I mean, getting Tunsil was an interesting thing, right? They would have loved to have gotten, I think, Ronnie Stanley, right? And I think they offered maybe a little bit more money than the Ravens did. I don't blame the command for staying with the Ravens, but these guys don't hit the market anymore. Like, teams aren't letting premier left tackles go. Now, you can argue about why Tunsil's been moved twice in his career, but the fact is, if we're talking particularly pass blocking, he's still a top 5 guy with years left in his playing career. The cupboards were so bare, Mitch, that they've had to kind of do this 2-system dance where they're trying to replenish with 1-year deals while also, you know, moving draft picks. I mean, I'd sign up for Deebo Samuels for a 5th round pick every time. I mean, it feels like whatever you do next year, that second and whatever the extra pick is next year, you're probably not going to get a better player than you do with Tunsil. But at the same time, you can't afford necessarily to only pick 5 players every year as well. How long can they kind of keep doing this dance?
Well, I mean, I think you need to continue to do this. And the fact is, you look at the hit percentage of draft/free agents from last year who contributed, you can't really
Incredible.
question what they're doing, because they did an incredible job of finding guys that fit their system, maybe weren't the biggest names out there, but fit their system and did what they did. I mean, you look at Dante Fowler, and folks are upset that 10.5 sacks walked out the door. But did anyone expect double-digit sacks from Dante Fowler last year? No. And I'm not saying that Wise or Kinlaw are going to recreate that, but they have a vision of the type of player that they want, and they go out and get them. And listen, Laramie Tunsil has been moved twice. He's been one of the best tackles in the NFL for a while. So before we get into all the praises of Laramie, that you have to recognize, or at least acknowledge, the fact that that is a thing. That's something that you have to take into consideration. But you go back to what Dan Quinn has built here in Washington, and the accountability that he's built both amongst the players and the staff and the front office. And I'm not saying he is, but there's a big capital IF, if he is a problem in whatever, sense of the word that is, you have a locker room that holds folks accountable. You have players who are leaders in there who aren't going to allow that. And quite frankly, his talent on the field surpasses any of those issues, because it's not just getting a great left tackle, a solid left tackle. It's what it does to the rest of the offensive line, and ultimately, big picture, what it does for the offense. Because Brandon Coleman did an admirable job last year at tackle. And quite frankly, I was all on board with him staying at left tackle. Now they brought in Laramie. That changes the whole story. But with him out there and, the entire offensive line, they had to leave tight ends in. They had to have chippers. They had to have running backs, step up and pass pro. And ultimately, that meant less players, out in patterns. And ultimately, Jaden and his legs got them out of a lot of situations last year, and will continue to, because that's the guy that he is. But if I'm able to say, hey, my left tackle's on an island, and I know he's going to take care of whatever happens over there, then the rest of the offensive line benefits. Your guards don't have to edge out that way. You don't have to switch. You don't have to, shift the O-line to do that. And you're able to focus whatever weak spots there may be on the offensive line with extra help, with a running back. And ultimately, big picture, when you talk about the offense, more guys out in patterns, even on the quick plays, being able to get an extra tight end out is a big deal, because a lot of times they were running, 3 guys out in patterns against, 7 defenders or 6 defenders. And, 6-on-3 ain't exactly a fair fight always, and there's not
That's
always
right.
going to be somebody open. So the idea of getting more guys out there and being able to run more route combinations and get more speed on the field, which is the biggest thing that I think this offense needs to do as it starts to progress in its iterations. And adding a left tackle isn't just about a left tackle; it's what it does for the entire offense. And Laramie is, you said, a top 5 pass blocker. I think it's probably top 2, and it might not be 2.
Yeah.
But the other thing I think about Laramie that he hasn't graded out particularly well against the run, at least in comparison to the pass. But part of what Cliff Kingsbury loves to do is getting those guys on the move, getting them downfield. And there's not an offensive tackle that I've ever talked to that doesn't relish the idea of getting a full head of steam and getting a layout of safety, 5 yards downfield. And they do that not just in the running back screens, but they do it with some of those quick passes out to the outside to the wide receivers. So, I mean, that he's kind of a game-changing player for this offense, as much as it would have been great to go get, T. Higgins or, some of the other big names that were yelled around this offseason. I think Laramie Tunsil will be an underrated, and it's hard to say that, part of why this offense is better this year.
Yeah, and it's funny kind of follow up what you're saying. I've brought this up a couple of times the last couple of weeks, and I've asked some folks that have come on. I mean, I wonder how much of Cliff's playbook they just threw out last year because he didn't feel like they could probably properly protect him, give him enough time to get some of those long posts, deep posts, some of the, some of those routes that you're trying to get into. If you can't protect them, to your point earlier, I think the offense will look extremely different this year.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. They threw a fair number of deep balls last year, but a lot of them were, the almost 50-50 deep balls, not the,
Right.
hey, we let the guy beat his corner and then Jaden was able to survey the field and get the ball out to him. It was, hey, Noah Brown's got a one-on-one shot. We know that guy is awesome using his body to box out defenders. We're going to throw that because we have a one-on-one shot. But it also goes to, Zach Ertz obviously was great last year. When he was able to stay healthy, he was, a really big part. But getting even Bates or Sennett or whoever else it is, at the tight end position, able to help run some seams and pull safeties off of the receivers on the outside is a big part of it. And all of it starts with what you're able to do up front. And Biadasz also, I think you have to talk about Biadasz because his second year in the system, you have a center that better knows his quarterback, better knows what he likes to do. He has a better feel for the guys around him in terms of, what their strengths and weaknesses are. So as far as him identifying defenses and, setting protections and stuff like that, I think that's even a big step forward. And, I think Tyler Biadasz kind of flies under the radar a lot, as a lot of centers do across the league. But that second year for a center, being able to get in sync with a quarterback behind him and have a better feel for that is a big, big deal also.
We had Steve Palazzolo on from the 33rd team on Wednesday. I asked him how big that Biadasz signing was, and he said he thought it was one of the bigger, more underrated signings last year. And I agree. He was fantastic. And you noticed when he wasn't in the game for sure. I think that was a huge pickup. And part of what makes this line to me, like, particularly when you get Cosme back, if Brandon Coleman is actually what we think he can be at guard, and at some point Connerly picks it up this year, I mean, you got to go back a long time in Washington, maybe since Trenton Morgan before you can start looking at a line that has this kind of talent on it, which is exciting. You mentioned the tight ends. I think the fan base is getting a little worried about a couple of the young guys, which is funny because they just got here last year. Two of them, right? Sinnott and McCaffrey. My question is, though, how do they get like it's going to be tough for Sinnott to find time on the field, right? Like, if Zach Ertz is going to play the majority of the games like he did last year, and we shouldn't expect that he does, but he did. And Bates is pulling all the other duties. Like, how do we find a way for Sinnott to get on the field? And I feel like the kind of same thing goes for McCaffrey.
Yeah, probably for both of them. I mean, I think when you talk about any of the other pass catchers, you have to look at how many targets are realistically going to be available for them, right? And it goes to Jalen Lane as well. Last year he threw 450, 500 passes, whatever the number was. If he throws 450 passes again this year, maybe he throws 500, whatever the number is, because half of his runs last year were scrambles. So if you're able to take out half of that half and make those passes, maybe he gets to 500 pass attempts. Terry's going to get 120, targets. Debo's going to get 100 targets. Ertz is going to get 50, 60, 70, 80, whatever that number looks like, not to mention Eckler and B-Rob. There aren't a whole lot of targets available for guys, that I haven't already named. And so I think this is one of those situations where fans are overly concerned about something that is more corollary to the rest of the offense being better. I think Commanders fans, Burgundy and Gold fans, whatever, have gotten real used to seeing names dropped in the draft and them stepping on the field right away and playing. And, you go back to the, Fred Davis draft with the two receivers that came with him, and everyone expects they're going to step right on the field. Right. They step right on the field and they play, and they're a big part of the offenses now. Now this team is getting more talent in here. It's okay to let guys develop. It's okay to have some patience. If there was a dearth at the receiver position where you didn't have guys that could get open and were making plays, then fine, you can get a little, frustrated that McCaffrey didn't take the step forward. If Zach Ertz wasn't the guy that he was last year and Sennett still had the year he had, yeah, you can be upset about it. But the fact of the matter is they have better players in front of them. And that's a good problem to have. You're creating a depth at positions. And I think it's going to be the same for Jalen Lane this year. I mean, how many targets are realistically going to be available to him, with Terry and Debo out there? I think that he's going to be a nice piece of this offense. But if you think he's going to go out and get 80 or 100 targets this year, I think it's probably too high of an expectation, because there are good established NFL players in front of them who are producing. So listen, I think you can look at the Connerly picks similarly. I think you can look at the some of the picks over the years, over the last year and this year similarly, in that they're building a roster that's not 1 to 22. They're building a roster that's 1 to 53. And that's an important distinction that this franchise hasn't had in a very long time.
In a very long time. Better chance that McCroskey Merritt leads the team in touches by the end of the season, or that Brian Robinson has a resurgence?
I mean, I don't even think it's a resurgence. I think Brian Robinson's going to have a good year this year. I know when you look at some of the websites that grade out offensive line, the Commanders' O-line graded out pretty highly. But when you kind of dig into it a little bit, you can look at how some of what Cliff Kingsbury was doing last year offensively. He did a lot of misdirections in the run. Teams started kind of picking up on it. And I think part of that is the offensive line was good last year. It was certainly good compared to recent offensive lines for this franchise, but it wasn't actually a good offensive line when you compare it, I think, across the league player by player. And I think you're seeing an increase of talent there, which I think will help the running game, and I think ultimately help Brian Robinson. I like Bill a lot. It's never going to be easy for me to call him Bill, just because you see the Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt name there, and it's hard to put the two and two together. I think he's going to be a nice piece. I think when I look holistically at this draft, as much as I think Jalen Lane will help this year, I think Krosky Merritt will help this year. I think Jalen Lane is ultimately, Debo Samuel's replacement if he ends up leaving. I think ultimately you look at Krosky Merritt, and maybe he's more of an Austin Eckler replacement when he leaves. I mean, again, we're talking about, both of those guys are at positions where you have established guys. And I know there's a lot of fatigue from the fan base about Brian Robinson and what he does. But I think he's a solid NFL running back. And when you look across the league, if it's not Saquon Barkley, if it's not Derrick Henry, if it's not Bijan Robinson, there's that top tier of running backs. That middle tier, is Tony Pollard better than Brian Robinson? They're the same play. And to me, they're about the same player. And, I look at the running back position a lot like I look at the safety position on defense, where it's become a turnstile of a position where, kind of that middle tier of players are all pretty similar. And to have a guy in there that already knows your system, knows your guys, I think is an important piece of it. And so while Brian Robinson, I don't expect he's going to be, a superstar by any means, I think he's a solid running back. And I think, he's probably going to lead this team in rushes.
It's
rushing attempts.
it's June 6th, and I
Yeah.
understand that. But let's get to the defense just a little bit. If you had your crystal ball out now, what is the who are the starting safeties on this team?
I mean, Quan Martin, no question.
Yes.
I think I think he last year was one of the most underrated players, and especially after listening to Joe Witt and company, sing his praises this past week at OTAs. I'm glad the coaching staff kind of recognizes it. Hopefully, that gets the name out for fans a little bit more who maybe we're a little angsty about him. And ultimately, I think it's going to be Will Harris, but I think that starting safety position is going to be reliant on who Marshawn Lattimore is, because as much as he has the pedigree and he's been a Pro Bowler before, but that was 4 years ago. That was 2021 the last time.
Yeah.
And this of the guys that weren't at camp, that was he's my biggest concern, because quite frankly, he's a guy that has struggled with staying healthy, and I'd love to see him around the team physicians and the team training staff in terms of continuing to improve his strength and flexibility, whatever else it is.
Is that the most frustrating no-show? I mean, I really wasn't going to talk no-shows at all because it's not like a big deal, and I didn't want to waste a lot of time on that. But of the three, is that the most frustrating that he's not there?
The other two are 2 out of 10 combined, and he's probably a 5 out of 10.
Yes. Okay.
We'll see him hopefully we'll see him at mandatory mini camp. But the fact of the matter is, you heard Joe Witt when he was talking, he's like, hey, we've been in contact. And then he kind of, talked about him a little bit and was like, and I guess we'll see what kind of shape he's in. Doesn't give me a ton of faith.
Sure.
Depends on how you read what he said. But to me, it's, that's the question. What kind of shape is he going to come in? And is he going to be able to be on the field? Because if he plays at the level he did last year, this corner position is very thin. And so to circle back to your original question, I think if Lattimore isn't good, and it's, again, if we're talking on June 6th, if he's, not the player that they expected that he was, I think you see Will Harris move in and be your slot corner more, and Sanders still works on the outside along with Trey Amos. But that's a lot of pressure on Amos, early on in his career. And, you're a second round pick in the NFL. You should have that pressure. But this corner group is maybe the most concerning group on this roster, because it's very, very thin.
I don't think they gave Will Harris any more money than Jeremy Chin got from the Raiders. Do you have a suspicion or an idea as to why he's not back this year?
I think it's a safety churn. You look at Cam Curl 2 years ago, right? Fans were up in arms that they didn't re-sign Cam Curl. Things were okay with Jeremy Chin, right?
Yeah.
I know fans aren't pleased that he's not back, but you replaced him again. And so I go back to that, running back safety churn. And if you're, the big contracts are going to be coming up. And I don't want to, if you don't want to touch on Terry, that's fine. But I'm not too concerned about Terry. I think he's going to sign. But big contracts are coming up. This team has money now. But the way that you don't find yourself in a New Orleans Saints situation where you're in cap hell is by being smart with the mid-level players. And I think not giving Chin, I think that's where hey, we're going to pay, Daron Payne, and we're going to pay, Laramie Tunsil, and we're going to pay, I think they're going to pay Terry McLaurin, they paid Sam Cosmi. Big contracts are coming. And so there are places where you're going to have to cut to keep those, higher end players. And to me, safety is one of those places where you can find a similar level of ability to a Jeremy Chin, for less money.
We've got about 10 minutes left. So maybe we'll just do offense today, and we'll try to get you back on to another defense another time. Let's do this. Let's talk Terry. I was reaching out, trying to figure out what people think about it. Sounds like it's guaranteed money this time, would be whatever the holdup. It generally is the guaranteed money. What do you think the contract ends up looking like?
Listen, the report last week is perfect June fodder.
Yes.
Terry, whatever. I think if you read between the lines, you can probably figure out, where that came from.
Yes. His agent.
Is it a surprise that Terry's not here because he wants a contract? No, we've known that for a while now. And I think that, I think folks kind of forget who Terry McLaurin is, right? Like, he's been, the rock of this franchise for a while. He's had every opportunity to be a pouty diva wide receiver.
That's right.
Not with Jaden, but with all the other quarterbacks that have had to throw him passes. And he's never been that guy, right? He's been a stand-up person. And I truly believe that he loves being in Washington and playing for this team. And I think he's going to get paid. I would expect it to be
DK just got 33 million a year.
Right. I expect it to be very similar to that.
Yeah.
Is it 34 million or 33.5 so that he's, maybe, a little bit of a one up of Debo? Maybe. But, he's one of those guys that I'm paying for. Like, I'm not signing a blank check, but if the guaranteed money difference is, 10 million over the course of 3 or 4 seasons, I'm willing to spend that money. And I think that this team, I think you see with the, you can talk about Jeremy Chin, you can talk about Cam Curl, whoever you want, but you see this team being smart with contracts when it's time to be smart with contracts. And again, not to go back to the old days, but that hasn't always been the case. And you now have a legitimate front office that has a vision for where this team wants to go. I'm sure they have laid out what the hell they're going to have to pay Jaden in a couple of years. And, who else, we'll figure out who else needs to get paid, what they're going to do with Debo Samuel, when that comes up.
If Terry gets 33, I mean, imagine if Debo has a good year this year, you can expect he's going to want something similar, right?
Right. And that, going back to the offseason, that's why I was hesitant about the T. Higgins signing, because knowing that Jaden's going to have a lot of money coming to him in the next couple of years, I don't know that you want to tie up, 70 or 80 mil a year with 2 wide receivers, and I think also it speaks to, I keep going back to it, but the plan that this team has, they have a vision, they have a direction, and they're not straying from it, because certainly this draft, I think the Amos pick was, certainly the right pick for a position of need with a good player, but you can easily look at, Connerly or other picks and look at guys who maybe could have had a bigger impact right away than maybe Connerly will. And they had a vision. They wanted to build this team a particular way. And I think that extends to the skill position players and Terry and Debo and all that. And I like that I like that we're seeing a vision executed. And so it's great fodder for June. It's a fun conversation. Hey, everyone wants to talk Terry. I'm very confident it gets done. And quite frankly, it's barely a blip on my radar as far as, what this team is going to be, as we get to mandatory minicamp, when we get to training camp, if there start being holdouts there, then maybe that changes, the way that I do it. But we're sitting here on June 6th. I'm not worried about September 7th, 8th, whatever day that first game of the season is, because I feel confident in this moment that Terry's going to be here when that happens.
And it was just a month ago that Adam Peters told Kay Adams that they expected Terry McLaurin to be a commander for a very long time. So, I mean, yeah. What else is he supposed to say? But I take him for his word on that one. Last one before we get out of here. You said earlier in the show at some point about how much things went right basically down the stretch last year. Maybe they overachieved just a little bit. What do you tell fans that expect them to go, 12 wins again? And I mean, they only had one more game. You got to the Final Four last year. There's only one more place to improve to. It will be tough to repeat that this year. What do you tell fans that expect, a run to the Super Bowl?
That's what fans should expect.
Yes.
For 25 years, fans of this franchise have had no expectations.
That's
hey,
right.
Let's have a winning season one year. Let's make the playoffs the next year. Let's build towards something. And that never happened. And so I understand why fans are maybe beaten down about it. You have one of the premier quarterbacks in the NFL for the first time maybe ever in this franchise's history, maybe the 1 year of RG3, but this guy makes everything possible. And when I went through the schedule, it's a tougher schedule and travel and all those different things. I get it. I had them at 12 wins again. And I think they're going to host a playoff game. I think they're going to win the NFC East this year. And maybe I'm being overly bullish on it. I think some of the losses on the Eagles defense are being under talked about and are going to be an important, deciding factor in what happens here. But I don't think that, I don't think any expectations are too high, because I'm not saying they will, but there's a very real possibility this team goes and wins the damn Super Bowl this year. And that's a crazy thing for us as we followed this franchise, through its ups and downs over the years, to go into a season with an expectation that they're going to win double-digit games, an expectation that they're going to go to the playoffs, an expectation that they're going to win a playoff game. I mean, you look at the playoff run last year and they caught fire at the right time and all those different things. NFL teams don't go on the road and win three straight playoff games. They don't go on the road and beat, the overwhelming, number one seed. They don't go on the road and beat, a veteran laden team like the Bucs had. I think that everything is possible this year. And I think that there's no game on the schedule that I look at that I mark as an automatic L. There's some tough situations. There's some tough places they have to go play. Kansas City on a Monday night obviously stands out as one, but nothing is a guaranteed loss. And the fact that you can go into every game and expect that this team is gonna fight and play hard and play well. And it's not just the quarterback, because you have to give Dan Quinn credit for having these guys prepared and and coming out strong, and Cliff Kingsbury for all the things that he's done on offense. And I know there's some of the edge angst on defense about where the sacks are going to come from. At the moment, in Adam Peters, I trust, because what they did last year in terms of bringing in guys who you had very little expectation for and went on the field and outperformed any expectations, I think can't be understated. And as I look at these changes this offseason and some of the moves they've made, I love it. And granted, I love it anyway because I love the big men, but I love that they committed to getting better against the run. They committed to getting better at running the ball and protecting the quarterback. That's where it all starts. And quite frankly, there's no team in the NFL that, if the Commanders end up in a shootout, that I don't expect that Jaden Daniels is going to come out on top. And so if you stop the run on defense, if you stop Saquon Barkley from getting those 20, 30-yard runs, 3 times in a quarter, and you put the ball in Jalen Hurts' hands, he's a very good quarterback. I would pick Jaden Daniels over Jalen Hurts every 7 days a week and twice on Sunday. That's so, that's just the fact of the matter with what we're seeing with Jaden there, and it makes everything possible.
Got me kind of pumped up for the weekend off that one there, big fella. Hey, listen, go enjoy you a glazed donut today. And as always, we always appreciate having you on, man. You're the best. Thank you.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, buddy.